Bonjour, and today we're covering the French conjugation system, and in particular the three groups of verbs that we have in French. And in general, most students don't get a buzz out of studying this topic, so teaching it can be perceived as a bad strategy to curry favor with the new learner. To make matters worse, I've seen even great teachers having a hard time teaching this complex topic with enough enthusiasm to ignite the spark in the student's heart. This is for this very reason that I'm warning you now. This lesson is no apple pie, okay? This is not an all-time favorite among students. However, I can guarantee that I will try my very best to serve your voracious thirst for French knowledge, or at least I hope so. And if you allow me, we will proceed to the theory. Are you ready? Let's go. As you can see, and I've already mentioned, we have three different groups of verbs in the French conjugation system. Group 1, verbs that end with ER, except for aller, which belongs to the third group. We have group number 2, verbs that end with IR. Group number 3, other verbs that end with IR. Verbs that end with OIR, with RE, and that verb, aller, which is irregular but belongs to the third group. And we have also auxiliary verbs that do not belong to one of those three previously mentioned groups. And yeah, the third group is considered to be the unpleasant group. This is the group that most people don't like because it changes all over the place. You have a bunch of rules that allow you to understand the patterns behind a bunch of endings, but you have also a lot of exceptions. So aller belongs to that group, irregular. You could say that the third group is the irregular one. The good news is that first group, second group are much easier to conjugate, and that you only have two alien groups that belong to the auxiliary world that, of course, you absolutely need to study. And you should really know these verbs really well in different modes, different tenses, because they come all the time. They come back all the time. So let's start with the first group, shall we? We have the first group, and this is the very good news, and I like to start with the good news. The good news is that in this first group, there are more than 6,000 verbs. That's a bunch. Really, you could say, you could tell a lot of things only relying on verbs of the first group. If you're really, really against studying that complex conjugation system with so many exceptions, I would recommend you just checked all or many verbs from the first group so that you wouldn't have to study the conjugation system, which is a strategy, that could work in order to communicate. Of course, you will have more information and more examples of these verbs on Geethan.com, or the link is below the video. Just click the link and you'll also have a bunch of exercise, which I really recommend you did in order to strengthen and consolidate the knowledge that you already have in your head, or that you just acquired after this lesson. An example of that is étudier. Étudier belongs to the first group. And have a look at these endings. J'étudiais. Imparfait. J'ai étudié. Passé composé. J'étudie présent. Futur j'étudierai. And this is the great news. Think about the 6,000 verbs that you have in that group. Well, they conjugate with the same endings. This is beautiful. This is really what I would recommend new learners did. They just studied a bunch of verbs from the first group, and then they will really quickly gather momentum and gather confidence, because they will know how to conjugate them, provided that they study at least how we conjugate one verb of the first group. Étudier is a good example of that. Of course, it's a beautiful verb. And then second group, we have the group that end with verbs that end in IR, and which present participle ends in issant. This is contrasting with the verbs that end with IR from the third group, okay? In the second group, there are approximately 300 verbs, and they end in IR, and their present participle ends in issant, like I just said. Among these verbs, you will find choisir, to choose, agir, to act. I love that verb, to act, agir, obéir, to obey, réussir, to succeed. And it's really, really, really good verb here, you know. You really, like, if you didn't know that réussir was to succeed, I implore you right now to study that verb. This is possibly my favorite verb. I really, really like that verb. I have a passion for that verb, and it is easy to conjugate in French. This is good news too. Second group, finir. Here is to end, okay? It is an example of how we conjugate that. Imparfait, je finissais. Or to finish. I finished. Passé composé, j'ai fini. I have finished or I finished, depending on the context. Présent, je finis. Futur, je finirai. The ending, again, is very predictable. You have 300 verbs you could study in that group, and you would have maybe like 6,300 verbs with easy conjugation in French. And this is where things get complicated. This is where we have the verbs of the third group. And I don't like teachers who say, yeah, you know, it's not that hard, it's simple, because they're lying. It's not simple. Man, you're going to really have to pick up on, you're really going to have to study. You really, at some point, you're really going to have to sit your butt and just, you know, understand that the French language is not easy when it comes to conjugation system. It's not easy, but it's also very liberating to realize you can master so many exceptions. And this is for this very reason that I encourage students to go slow with the verbs of the third group. Go bit by bit. Start with the basics, the rules that will allow them to uncover more and more, bit by bit. But without trying to swallow everything at once. You know, it would be delusional to believe that a person could study all the verbs of the French language fast. It would be really delusional. The third group encompasses 4 subcategories. So let's divide that third group in 4. Verbs that end with IR, but you will see that the present participle of these verbs do not have the same ending as the verbs from the second group. And then we have the ending OIR, and then we have the ending RE, as well as the verb aller. And aller is very irregular, so you'll see that in a minute. Group 3 verbs include dire, to say, well, to tell, percevoir, to perceive, prendre, to take, attendre, to wait. And you know, you can recognize them from their endings here. Let's take the first verb that could be a verb of group 2, mourir, to die. You know, it's hard to conjugate, and I find it funny that it's so hard to conjugate where, you know, it's a verb that elicits strong emotions, but it's pretty easy to conjugate in Japanese, you know, and for some reason it's very hard to conjugate in French. In the imparfait, je mourrai, passé composé, je suis mort, conjugates with the auxiliary verb to be, and this is something that we'll cover, of course, in the lesson with le passé composé. Some verbs work with to be auxiliary, the to be auxiliary, and other verbs work with to have. And mourir is a state, so you have to use the auxiliary verb to be. Présent, je meurs. Futur, je mourrai. And it's confusing, see? Sometimes you have 1 R, sometimes you have 2 R's, and this belongs to the harder part of the conjugation system in French. So really need to know what group pertains to which, what group is linked to the certain verb that you are studying. It's very important in order to conjugate it properly, and even then you still have to look at the conjugation system now and then, or very often, if you really want to be sure, because those rules are helping, but still it's a good idea to have a verb dictionary and to do that bit by bit. The key is doing it bit by bit, really. Second group is a second subcategory of the third group is recevoir, to receive. Je recevais, j'ai reçu, je reçois, je recevrai. All right? I think it's easy. when it's done for you. The third subcategory, rendre, to give back. For example, imparfait, je rendais, j'ai rendu, je rends, je rendrai. And finally, aller. J'allais, je suis allé, je vais, j'irai. Quite irregular, that one as well. Very important verb, of course, so I recommend that you study that verb anyway, regardless whether it is a verb of the third group or from another group. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's very, very important verb to cover. And then we cover the three groups here, and then we have être et avoir, to be, to have. They are not classified as belonging to one of the groups mentioned before. Instead, they are auxiliary verbs, and they're like, they're their own sort of thing. They have their own party on the side because they're so powerful, so mighty. They don't really need to be mixed up with the other verbs. Like they're above and beyond the categories of verbs. Être, j'étais, imparfait, j'ai été, passé composé. What if you try to repeat after me when I say these verbs? It's very important, and I'm not sure if your pronunciation is perfect yet. J'étais, j'ai été, je suis, je serai. I think you did a good job there. I'm pretty sure you did. Or even if you only thought the verb, I'm happy about it. Avoir. J'avais, j'ai eu, j'ai, j'aurais. I often hear the mistake here. People are not certain how to pronounce U. J'ai eu. You pronounce it exactly the same way as you would pronounce the letter U. J'ai eu. And let's wrap it up. Today, we learned that the French conjugation system is no apple pie. We learned that you have three groups, different groups, that you can mostly identify from the ending of a verb, but it doesn't work all the time because sometimes you need more information, like in the case of verbs ending with IR. It's not enough. When you encounter a verb and it ends with IR, it's not enough to know that it could be belonging in a specific group. No, you need to know in that case if the present participle ends with issant, and then it's a verb of the second group. And then you have the third group, which can be divided in 4 subcategories, with aller having its subcategory of its own. It's pretty bold from that verb to do that, but that's what's happening. And then we have the auxiliary verb être and avoir, which do not belong to these 3 groups. And now is the opportunity for you to find out whether or not you could retain information, a good amount, or enough to complete the exercise and the test that is to be found when you click the link below this video. And I'm excited for the future of your French, because if it's only the first time you find out about groups and verbs in French, this is a very, very important step. And I hope I could be an ambassador of the French language for you to delve deeper into that language. Now, click the link down below, do the exercise, and I really hope it works for you now. Otherwise, you can do it another time. But thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in another one. Take care.